All right, folks, welcome back to Three's Inn. Now I'm going to tell you about a story I heard when I went through pilot training in 1970-71. The event actually occurred in the early to mid 60s. I'm probably thinking around 62, 63, somewhere in that area there. And it involved two majors from the academic squadron at this particular base they were flying out of. The base could have been Moody or Craig or Columbus, one of the East Coast bases. And these guys were on their way to San Antonio on a Friday night. They had an important meeting down in the Auger Inn at Randolph. So they were highly motivated to get there. At any rate, they stopped at England Air Force Base to refuel. And when they came out, they got in the airplane, strapped in, fired it up, and only one motor would start. Well, crap. It's going to put a damper on things. So they shut down, walked back into base ops. And like I mentioned, these guys were from academics. So they pretty well knew how to chase through the charts to find out what the restrictions were and if they could make it and so forth. Now, we carried these checklists like this. I don't imagine they carry anything like this today. But these checklists have charts and graphs and so forth. You get an idea here, perhaps you can see. At any rate, so they go chasing through this takeoff chart, single engine, and they discover we can make it. We can make it. With the available runway they had, the temperature, the winds, the environmentals, and so forth, we can make it. Love that spirit. The idea was to get the airplane airborne, and then once they had airflow through the engine, try an air start and see how that would work. Makes sense. And at the time, like I said, this was early on in our T-38 operations. There wasn't anything in our operating manuals that prohibited us from doing a single engine takeoff. Okay, fine, except common sense. Anyway, so these guys go out, they strap in the airplane and fire it up and give the crew chief the signals to pull the chocks. And the crew chief looks up at him and he goes, start the other engine? We're good. So the crew chief pulls the chocks and off they go. Now the thing that probably saved their lives is the crew chief goes over to the line shack, calls the tower and says, hey, you see that white jet that's taxiing out? And the guy says, yeah. And he says, well, that jet has two engines, but only one in this airplane's working. Oh, goodness. So they reach over and hit the scramble button for the HH-43 Pedro helicopter. In those days, we used to have a helicopter sit alert with fire suppression bottle. So these guys on a Friday afternoon, helicopter guys, something to do. So they run out, get in the helicopter, fire it up, lift off, go pick up the fire bottle. And they're just about getting airborne when these guys, the two majors, get takeoff clearance. Okay, so they line up on the very end of the runway, run the engines up, and or the engine up, and lit the burner, release the brakes, and start down the runway. Not a problem. I could just imagine the scene. You have this guy out there taking off, very slowly I might add, and then you have the helicopter sitting there watching the whole show. So these guys get down the runway and they're able to nurse it airborne, although just the single engine. And this is where things went south for them. When you put the gear handle up in the T-38, first thing that happens is these two main gear doors come down to allow the gear to come up. Well, those two main gear doors add 200 pounds of drag on the airplane. And that was just enough to kill any excess lift that they had, any excess lift. Well, that in turn put them right into a set of wires just off the end of the runway. Boom. So they hit these wires, and of course everything just goes south from there, including the airplane, right into the ground, into the dirt. Fortunately, they just pancaked into the dirt, slid to a stop, and so forth. The helicopter was right there on them, put the fire out, and that brought an end to that as they slid to a stop. Suffice to say, they didn't make it to the Auger that night, but there was nothing that said they couldn't do it. Shortly thereafter, there is something that says You got to have all your engines running to take off. You wouldn't think you'd have to put that in the operating instructions, but that's how that gets in there. And just as a side note, sometimes when I would hear these things like this or see these things in our operating manuals, I would often wonder where this came from. And after they told me that story, or after we were told that story very early on in the career, as I went through the rest of my career and we get these mandates or these new restrictions put on, I wonder who screwed up for that to be put in there. And often, as it turns out, I could trace it down to the event which mandated the restriction. Anyway, that's how we came to use both engines for takeoff. Thanks for stopping in, and we'll talk to you again shortly.